All right, so let's look at movement variability and discuss this topic, which is a very important topic. There's two definitions I want to discuss here. The first one is from a study by Lockhart and Sterigoy in 2013 that defined movement variability as the normal variations that occur in motor performance across multiple repetitions of a task. So this just indicates that no two movements are really ever quite the same, so there's no such thing as a perfect posture. All right, so we don't want to try to be overly critical of people's movements, and there's actual natural variations that are very healthy for movement. The definition that I wanted to discuss a little bit more in detail in this workshop is the variations in activities that occur throughout a lifetime. All right, and just kind of understanding that movement invariability can come from being too inactive or too active doing the exact same thing. And that, I think, is something that could be a bit of an epidemic in our fitness industry. I think we're moving out of that, but when you look at things such as just getting on an elliptical or a treadmill or just doing inordinate amounts of running and cycling, it is movement invariability, just the same as sitting in a chair for 8 hours a day is movement invariability. So greater movement variability throughout the course of your life leads to less overuse to specific muscles. So you're not always in the same positions, therefore you're balancing your muscles a little bit more. So that would be the next thing. It creates balanced tissue activity. You get to use your hip extensors, your hip flexors. If you're moving in 3 planes, forward, backward, side to side, rotationally, you're going to use your hip rotators, your hip abductors, adductors. You're just trying to get more muscle activity by mixing up your activity. All right, so then there's also more options for task completion. A good example of this is getting up and down from the ground. Okay, so if you have difficulty with movement limitations, you're immobile, and you have very little experience getting up and down off the ground, you're going to pigeonhole yourself into really being able to do it one way or fewer ways. And the less options for movement you have, really the more dangerous movement is, because once you start losing more and more movement options, the less functional you are as a human being. All right, so we want to really take movement variability seriously and not just have exercise programs, but really appreciate the wide spectrum of movements and really be exploratory with how we move as human beings. Factors to consider with movement variability are the amount of time you're stationary. So living a sedentary lifestyle decreases your movement variability, but also, as I mentioned before, the amount of time doing the same activity. The amount of time training the same energy systems is often overlooked, where we can have, be performing complex movements. We can be doing squatting type movements, pressing type movements, pushing, pulling. But if we're always training strength and going for 5 sets of 5 super slow, then we can injure ourselves when we have to be powerful or explosive, or when we have to do things for longer periods of time. So we want to make sure that we're training all the energy systems. We're going to train powerful movements, strength-based movements, endurance, and speed. We want to be able to move fast and continuously. Movement dysfunctions and restrictions will limit your movement variation. So you will have less options for movement if you have mobility limitations and restrictions. So it's important that your mobility is as good as it can be, and that you're constantly trying to master positions that might have end range movements that you don't quite have access to yet. Well, you don't want to just accept that. You want to actually work on trying to get to end range and train in end range. So we'll talk about the link and the relationships between mobility, stability, and motor control. So mobility can be defined as, can a position just be attained? Is it possible to get into the position of interest? Stability would be, can the position be maintained statically or dynamically? So if we use an example of a squat, for instance, mobility would be, can you just get to the bottom of the squat, hips below knees, or whatever you're deeming the bottom of the squat to be. Stability would be, if you start in a position where you're trying to brace your abdominals or keep a neutral pelvis, can you maintain that neutral pelvis from a standing position at the top through the bottom of the squat? All right, without losing, as your hips and your ankles and your knees go through the full range of motion, can you maintain the areas that you want to maintain stationary, which is usually going to be the areas of the scapula, maybe the cervical spine, trying to keep a neutral head position, and also the lumbar pelvic region or the core. All right, so there's an inverse relationship to stability and movement variability. The more stable you are, the less variability of movement, because you're basically trying to keep things still. All right, so there's a time for that, but we want to make sure that with movement as a whole, there's always a mixture of certain areas that you want to stay still and certain areas that you want to be mobile as can be. Motor control would be a blend between both mobility and stability. So basically, it's can the positions and transitions be coordinated seamlessly to meet the demands of a given task. So coordinating mobility and stability would fall under the category of motor control. Can you do what is asked of you when it is asked of you, basically? All right, and in this case, with decreased motor control, you have decreased movement variability. So there's a direct relationship between the two. All right, so you have less options for movement when your motor control is poor. All right, so when you have good motor control, you will be able to basically pick and choose the way you want to move, so you'll have a lot of options for variability.